Hey there, I'm Chaz the Advocate. I've found myself doing these series of videos about government of Australia claiming that there's a threat of right-wing extremism growing in Australia. This being 2021 post the outrageous, lunatic, fringe empowerment agenda that's taken over since this COVID-19 thing started at the beginning of 2020. I don't need to tell most people, just things have gone burko since that time. Here we are heading towards halfway through 2021. It's May now. I did 2 or 3 of these videos. I won't bore you with too much backtracking, but suffice it to say, like all of the Five Eyes countries, the UK, US, Australia, Canada and New Zealand, every one of those governments has this agenda of constantly hammering away, claiming that there's a threat of right-wing extremism in those countries. Now, it's most prevalent in the United States, but you'll hear it also in the other 4. And it was interesting hearing British academic Douglas Murray on a blog the other day. I saw it on YouTube, where he was debating this activist from Holland talking about identity politics. And just a throwaway line they were just sort of debating backwards and forwards on the stage, all relatively civil, and he sort of moderated his, not that he's a radical anyway, but yeah, anyway, his claim was that it's being pushed, that being identity politics and critical race theory, most notably in, and he mentioned the 5 countries I've just mentioned. I don't know that he mentioned Five Eyes specifically, but he mentioned those countries. And I thought, well, that backs up exactly what I've observed, and that is that there seems to be a deliberate campaign to weaken and destabilise countries that have a predominantly European, Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Celtic, whatever you want to call it, what the racist left like to call white, to try and classify all people of European descent as white's kind of absurd. But anyway, that's what they choose to do. So we can go with white if that's what they want to use. They're trying to destabilise those 5 countries and their nation-state government systems, the beliefs of the what have always been touted as Judeo-Christian faith, that the legal system's built on, that the countries were started on. Very much so. The United States, Canada and Australia, I think the British learned a lesson from getting a bloody nose taking on George Washington when they colonised Australia in 1788. They ran the place like it was an entire convict camp, even though they did have convict labour there, slave labour. We hear a lot about black slaves, who hear bugger all about white slaves, but they were slaves, no doubt about it. And the Aboriginals, local Aboriginals, weren't enslaved and forced to labour. They did eventually choose to, because they wanted to partake in the white man's type of food and housing, and they're good workers, the Indigenous Australians, and back then they weren't paid what they were worth, there's no doubt about that. But anyway, that's another topic. So we move along and we look at this threat of right-wing extremism that's claimed. Now, I went through a bunch of articles last time. As I say, I don't want to go back over them too much, but the genesis of it was a push that came pretty much straight after the mosque shootings in New Zealand. And ever since, there's been this, particularly on the left, but also in the intel services, and this group that I came across called the AVERT, which are a bunch of academics in Australia who study so-called terrorism. Of course, they're largely focused on, they were Islamic terrorism. This is the thing. It's now shifting towards right-wing terrorism or extremism. They started off, everything's about extremism, right-wing extremism or Islamic extremism. This lady here, Professor Michelle Grossman from the, I think it's called the Intel College, something like that in Canberra. She's a key speaker. this other lady up here, Dr. Deborah Smith, they're fairly closely aligned. A lot of these other academics, Greg Barton's, I've followed his work for a while. He's a bit of an expert on, if my memory serves me correctly, on counterterrorism, global Islamic politics. So anyway, but these are the people that governments rely on, that the security services will rely on. See, national security laws, violent extremism in Australia, human rights. They always love to throw in human rights, except when they pertain to people of European descent, the natives of Australia. And we are the natives. My family's been here on both sides since the mid-1800s. I'm as much of a native as any Indigenous person. I don't care if you've been here for 10,000 years. My family's been here for 150 years. You can't be sort of saying that, oh, well, they've been here since the dawn of time, so they've got more power. This is the dichotomy we're being confronted with this multi-pronged takedown of the power base of European Judeo-Christian societies, and that is that on one hand they want to tell Europeans, oh, you don't have any culture. You invaded here. You're just a colonial. You're systemically racist. Your politics based around a patriarchy. So they're looking to basically hammer away at particularly white men. That's why they're going with a multi-pronged approach. In Australia at the moment, we've had a sustained campaign for at least 6 months now, maybe longer. It's sort of like been morphing out of the initial shock of the whole COVID-19 thing into this sustained attack on the so-called Conservative Liberal National Party government in Australia of Scott Morrison, where feminists are claiming that Morrison's running this bunch of misogynists, much like Julia Gillard did, the former Labor Party Prime Minister, where that speech where she screeched at the Prime Minister Abbott at the time, I'm not going to be lectured about misogyny by you. And so this is the Labor Party following the tactics of the DNC in the US, and that is to use identity politics as a tool to smear so-called conservatives. Any government that wants to go, well, hang on a minute, let's not get carried away, let's just do things at a sensible pace, don't sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater, for want of a better cliche. But this guy here, Peter Dutton, is Australia's Minister for Home Affairs, which I think is a copy of what they have in the UK. It basically means he handles security, as you might expect. You can see here, this was December last year. A threat to Australia. Experts welcome and inquiries focus on rise of right-wing extremism. Now, of course, The Guardian is a Marxist mouthpiece out of the UK, so any chance they get to bash right-wing extremism, they will. And you say, well, what the hell's right-wing extremism and why it's different to left-wing extremism? And that's a good question, which I spoke about in the other videos. And that is that left-wing extremism's the only extremism, other than the occasional Islamic extremism that we haven't seen a lot of recently, but it's the only extremism that we're seeing. In the United States, they had a sustained 5 or 6 months of endless riots, lootings, burnings, destruction of police vehicles, trying to invade courthouses and police precincts. You had the Democratic governments guttoing out and really just basically pulling back the barriers like they supposedly did at the Capitol building, and just letting these rioters, Antifa and BLM rioters, just go berko. And people have been killed. I've seen endless footage of white people just being randomly bashed. There was a few deaths. There was a couple of black policemen killed. There was a couple of if you've been watching it, you've been watching it. Let's stick to this thing in Australia. So the point I'm trying to make is that the threat's not from right-wing extremism. The threat is from left-wing extremism here just as much as it is in the UK and the other 4 or 5 Eyes countries. So anyway, Dutton has basically said we don't want to just focus on right-wing extremism. You want to talk about extremism, let's focus on all facets of extremism. and that's a good thing for him to say. As I say, they take their advice from these academics, Australian academics, and a lot of their advice is also utilised by the Brits as well. So anyway, this is the ASIO boss at the moment, Mike Burgess, and whether it be under pressure from Dutton or not, this is March this year, and Dutton's speaking here in December last year, Burgess has said, okay, we'll dump the terms right-wing extremism and Islamic extremism. And in my last video I said, well, it's a good thing, good thing. Whether he's doing it just to placate Dutton, or whether he's trying to be specific. I thought about this since I did my last video, and I've got a page for you that prompted me to even do this one to show you in a second. At the time I said, he may be just playing with semantics. Let's face it, the heads of agencies like ASIO and the CIA, FBI, MI6 are not known for their steady as she goes methodologies. They'll always go with a what they call it, sometimes they refer to an excess of caution. Well, it's an excess of excess in terms of these kinds of people. So when he came out and said this, okay, I'm going to dump the term right-wing extremism and Islamic extremism, I thought at first it was like, oh wow, that's good, because when they focus on right-wing extremism, it allows the left to basically co-opt that. And as they have in the United States, you've got Biden going after anyone that's assisted Trump, the so-called hoaxed invasion of the Capitol building. They've arrested like 400 people, yet you've had thousands of BLM and Antifa rioters literally destroy city after city in the United States. Yeah, sure, some of them have been arrested, but most of them are released almost immediately after Hollywood and Silicon Valley pay their bail, and they don't get any meaningful penalty anyway. But so this is why they want to use the term right-wing extremism and by they I mean the left want to focus on right-wing extremism. And I think, in retrospect, even though I thought him changing the terms, what was he saying? Now he wants to be ideological extremists rather than specifically right-wing or left-wing, and also religiously motivated extremism or violent extremism. The fact that he's focusing on violent extremism, although, ideologically motivated violent extremism and religiously motivated violent extremism, even though I think he's been instructed by Dutton, although Dutton can't really instruct him totally. It's like a symbiotic relationship, as you'd expect, but just as in the States, the UK and Australia, and very likely Canada as well, the intel services have been getting more and more power and are now a lot bolder, and the days of being instructed by politicians are probably behind us. They run their own game, these intel services, and let's face it, we're run as a global concern anyway. As Australia, those other countries I mentioned, we're no longer sovereign nations. People don't know this. You speak to people in the street, if you can even get them to talk about it, because as soon as you start talking about this kind of thing, they clam up and don't want to speak about it for fear someone might hear them and snitch on them. And you'll see in a minute they've probably got good reason to be concerned about that. So anyway, I digress again. This guy, head of ASIO, our version of the CIA, okay, we won't call it right-wing extremism, Islamic extremism, we'll call it blah blah. Ideologically, as I said last time, who the hell would want to be at a press conference? I hope this guy's got his talking jaws going, because you're at a press conference and you get the woke left from the ABCs. So why have you changed it to ideologically motivated violent extremism and religiously motivated violent extremism? Try and say that 3 times fast. It's set up to be difficult to say, and as I said also last time, you can bet the media will continue to harp on about the right-wing threat in Australia is real and growing. He said this. He said this in February 2020, so over a year ago. This guy who took over from the last guy, I can't remember his name, I've got it here somewhere, but he said at the time, extreme right-wing threat in Australia was real and growing, with small cells regularly meeting to salute Nazi flags, inspect weapons, train in combat, and share their hateful ideology. I called that bogus and bull crap last time, and even though I think it was the Daily Mail had some pictures of wannabe Nazis prancing around with flags and stuff, I think this talk of growing small cells, maybe they got flags, but inspecting weapons, train in combat, and share their hateful ideology, I can't say that's not true, but I find it unlikely. But I will say that this endless harping on about white supremacy, white flight, white guilt, white fragility, all of these virulently racist terms. Can you imagine trying to say that about any other minority? If you said that about Muslims, if you said that about black people of any, from any country, Asian people, any other minority but white Europeans, you'd have the media screaming at you. And these days, just as in the UK, you get a visit from the cops and get arrested. There was an article on one of the platforms the other day about a AFL, Australian Football League player, or was it NRL? One of the two. And he's an Indigenous Australian, and purely because of something that happened in the football arena, he claimed to be receiving nasty, hateful emails or SMSs or some bloody thing. And straight away he goes, all right, I'm going to take action, because they're very emboldened now because we've had controversies with AFL and NRL. And I'm not saying that's justified. Of course it's not justified. You shouldn't be. You want to get upset about how the guy played the game, say so, but don't bag the guy because of his race. That any normal person knows that. This is what I say. This claim of white supremacy and right-wing extremism is bogus. It's bogus, and it's been introduced not because they give a crap about offending black people, Islamic people, feminists, trans people, anyone except white Anglo-Saxon men. Yeah, they're the only people who are allowed to be endlessly offended. And getting back in my roundabout way to what I was trying to say is that this guy claiming that he's got these growing threat of cells of neo-Nazis, you're going the right way about it, allowing the media, if you want to do anything, target the extremists on the left who keep on harping on about all of this racist, apartheid-level hatred directed at white European people. And that's part of a coordinated campaign that comes out of this globalist takedown. That's all part of the Great Reset and rejigging the whole world. They know, globalists, that they have to break the cohesion of countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK and the US, because these 5 countries, not only these 5 countries, there's plenty of European countries that are probably a hell of a lot better off than Australia in particular, and they're focused over there too, but they're definitely, like Douglas Murray said, seems to be a focus on the Five Eyes countries. And maybe it's a coalition of intel people, of avert people, these academics. Oh yes, if we're going to bring in a new world order, we have to stop these countries, being independent. And that's what they're trying to do. They want to break down what we have, and we should be saying no. We're not accepting that. We don't want you breaking down. And this is how they also try to inflame it. ASIO boss warns of rising foreign interference and far-right extremism. So this same guy, Burgess, this is March, so a month before, and you can hear him hammering away all the time, and you're thinking, our country's going down the gurgler financially, you can't travel from one state to the other half the time, you've got idiots walking around with masks on all the time when they don't need to wear masks. Masks don't do squat. That's been proven over and over again by people a lot more qualified than me in the medical and in virology expert area. And sorry, that was a bit of a rough trail of words there. But anyway, getting back to it. So the same guy talking in February, sorry, this is a good year ago. I'm out by about a year there. This one here is March this year, but the same dude about a year and a month ago was saying the same thing. Interestingly, back then he threw in the threat of rising foreign interference as well as the far-right extremism thing. See, I think this is he handed over from he took over from his predecessor. I can't remember his name. I think he was basically going, here I am, I'm the new dude. And he was asked, well, what are you doing? What are you doing with all the millions and billions that we pump into your agency and when you're spying on everyone, when you're cooperating with the NSA and GCHQ and, Unit 8200 over in Israel, spying on everyone, confabulating and doing whatever the hell you do. Once upon a time, they were focused on I have to say that the Muslims must all be breathing a sigh of relief because finally the focus is off them after, since the first Gulf War, they've had the focus on them, not just focus cruise missiles and, bombs raining down from above. Now the focus is on rising foreign interference and far-right extremism, not only in Australia, but in Australia in this case. Now, very soon after that, he dropped the rising foreign interference thing because China stomped on Australia from an economic standpoint because our Prime Minister dared to ask for an independent evaluation of how the Wuhan virus started. And they've been bullying us. They've dumped something like 30 billion of our exports, where we've foolishly allowed China to become our number one trading partner. And that's left us extremely vulnerable. It's not just Australia, but there again, China's been weaponised and assisted by this globalist cult that wants to bring in a one-world police state. Chinese basically what a slave labour pay rates, and don't even get me started on the Uyghurs or the Falun Gong. They've been used to essentially undermine our economies in all the Five Eyes countries. And so China's very angry at Australia. Our friends across the ditch in New Zealand have just grovelled, stabbed us in the back, and now kissing up to China and lecturing us about how we should do the same. So Burgess dropped the whole rising foreign interference thing. You notice he wasn't very specific which foreign, but there's no disputing what he's talking about. And now it's all far-right extremism. And this is where a lot of this crap comes from. This is the article in the Daily Mail, and they're pushing endlessly, saying there's this threat. See, because Christchurch mosque shootings happened in I think it was March 2019. So it's 2 years now since that happened. So when they're pushing this agenda of a threat, they need a bogeyman. They need there to be some. Well, they prefer it. These days they don't seem to care, particularly in the US. They just go, well, this is the threat and this is what we're going to do. You go, what threat? And they go, well, we're telling you there's a threat. But I don't see a threat. Well, we're telling you there's a threat. So even though this guy's placated Burgess, Dutton, the Home Affairs Minister, by changing words and changing semantics, it turns out that that was all fluff. Here we go. This is in RT, the Russian thing. Australian intelligence predicts terrorist attack in next 12 months. Police seek new powers to combat extreme ideologies. Now, this is only a couple of days ago, and that's concerning, and I could tell this was the build-up. I'm not alone in that. So here you go. This is what it was about all along. So they sort of equivocated backwards and forwards. Oh, yes, there's the threat. There's the threat. This guy... He seems to want to be seen to do his job, and he said, okay, well, let's just focus on all terrorism. And this guy's going, all right, okay, if you insist, I'll play tiddlywinks with the words and change the labels if that will keep you happy. It's just violent extremists, ideological extremists and religious extremists. We won't focus, even though he came out and said he was quite happy to use the term right-wing extremism when he thought it was necessary. And here you go, this is back from February 2020, as I said, rising foreign extremism, and of course you got the pictures from the mosque shootings in New Zealand. Anytime they pull this one out of the bag, and it's all about more money, which becomes quite obvious here when you go down here, are requesting not only new powers that would make possession of propaganda and terrorist manifestos illegal to possess and share, as intel agencies predict a terrorist attack within 12 months. What terrorist attack? They're full of it. There's no evidence there's going to be a terrorist attack. We haven't had any Islamic extremism in Australia for quite a time. We do get the odd one here and there. They're mainly just people in cars who are angry, who drive, particularly in Melbourne, surprisingly, and seeing as Melbourne is the centre of globalist insurrection in Australia. That makes me highly suspicious. But anyway, let's not get too conspiratorial. Here's my friend again, Mike Burgess, the Director General of ASIO, told a Parliamentary Intelligence Committee that a terrorist attack in Australia is probable. How do you know that, Mike? I know you're spying on everyone, but how do you know that? And I think it's largely that they're watching a lot of these guys who are like wannabe Nazis who are on there concerned. And they're right to be concerned. When you have your own people being endlessly racially vilified, we had some scumbag racist person from a local council go to a private school or I think it was a Christian school in Melbourne the other day, and she gets in there with the full knowledge of the principal and says, all the white boys stand up. Now apologise for your privilege and was it misogyny or whatever it was. And of course a lot of the parents were really teed off, and the principal ducked and covered and went, I didn't know what was going to happen. And people called for this person to be sacked, and the principal should have been sacked. And that person, who was some kind of youth advisor for the local council, Kingston Council in Melbourne, they should have been fired immediately, and they should have been charged, just like the two young guys that got charged for racially or mentioning racial epithets when he was talking about the football player. You can't have it one way and not the other. If you're going to get arrested for saying something nasty online about a football player because he's black, then you go into a public school, I don't care who you represent, and make white boys stand up and start racially vilifying them, which is exactly what this woman did. She should have been charged, but of course she wasn't. It was like her name wasn't mentioned, and it was like, oh, well, and it's quickly swept it under the carpet. But that's the second time that's happened that I know of. And you can bet your bottom dollar they're going to keep trying to do it, because this is what's happening in the States. It's in a far more advanced stage in the United States than it is here. But this is a UN mandate to basically vilify white people and have the state do it for the UN and their globalist bankster friends. So Burgess warned the committee that Australia's youth is being ensnared in racist, supremacist and misogynist ideologies. So that's definitely, he's harping on about right-wing extremism. There's nothing there about Islamism until he throws in at the last minute, though concluded that Sunni-based extremism is still the intelligence agency's major concern. Okay, if that's the case, what's all this crap about? Being ensnared in racist, supremacist and misogynist ideologies. I call bullshit on that. That is, there's always people around who have radical views about, that whenever they perceive a problem, they want to go around and scream at someone and in many cases beat them up. But they're a tiny minority, particularly in a country like Australia, and we've always had them. Every country has them. But this guy and his friends at groups like this AVERT and the intel agencies, government agencies, this dude here, ASIO, and the people who are pushing this from international globalism, they're always looking for a reason, and they love it when things like these supposed neo-Nazi thugs come along, because that aids their campaign. And here we go, look at this. Former US Intel Director backs Turnbull and Rudd's call for Murdoch media inquiry. Wow. So this is only a matter of days ago, a week or so ago. Here you got James Clapper. You wouldn't trust this guy to, mow your front lawn. Clapper and Brennan were front and centre in the US at harassing Trump, smearing Trump. They were part of that Lincoln Project, I think. Or they were tied in with the Lincoln Project. Yeah, you can do your own research on that. But the balls on this guy to come out to Australia and say we need a royal commission into Rupert Murdoch's empire in Australia is laughable. This guy's regularly featured on CNN along with the Brennan, and they hate Murdoch, the Murdoch media, particularly Fox News and Tucker Carlson in the US, because they both call them out on their complicity with the Democrats in stealing the last presidential election, not so much because they hated Trump, but because they wanted to get rid of any conservative government. These guys are all on board with this Washington Beltway agenda, tied in with globalism, tied in with the Chinese to bring in a communist one world police state. And in Australia we have Sky News, we have a lot of conservative older journalists who have still got a voice and who are still pushing back against this, and we have two former Australian Prime Ministers in Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull, who, ironically, this guy's supposedly conservative. He's about as conservative as Vladimir Lenin. And then this dude who was for the Labor Party. Both Prime Ministers were despised by their own parties, particularly Rudd. There's a whole doco on it, and there's nothing but Labor Party politicians saying how he was a control freak and a really painful person to run their party. They couldn't wait to dump him. And much the same with Turnbull. Maybe he wasn't as full on as Rudd, but he was in the LNP, the so-called Conservative Party, and they couldn't wait to get rid of him either. And these two guys are now joining up their new buddies, and they want to blame Murdoch media for it. They can't bring themselves to accept that maybe the Australian people and their own parties beneath them couldn't stand their ratbag beliefs. They want to blame it on the Murdoch. Oh, it must be the Murdoch media. The Murdoch media is influencing all these dumb Australians who are too stupid to think for themselves. It's the same arrogance you see from the DNC in the United States. They use black people as a weapon. They manipulate them like they've been manipulating them for decades. And thank God you got people like Larry Elder, Candace Owens, and Thomas Sowell come out, and amongst many others, and tell the black people the truth. You're being used. The left doesn't give a damn about you. The left only cares about power. And, so, go back to this thing that prompted me to do this video in the first place. This I could see this coming. It's concerning. In light of Burgess's warning, ASIO head, the Australian Federal Police are now reportedly pushing for a change in the law that would allow them to criminally punish Australians. See, they always want to punish someone. Australia has never escaped its convict beginnings. I've lived here my entire life, and we have more punishing laws, fines, sanctions, jailings. There's like about 20 different versions of them for every offence, particularly when it comes to things like drugs, drink driving, theft. You might get, anything like that. They love punishing you. They love fining you. They love throwing you in jail, smearing you in the media. So, this is an ideology over here. It's the same in the UK, but it's never. Australians have copped it all along. So whilst this is new, it's just more of the same. And you go, well, he did say that it's about, cracking down on radicalisation of Australians by prohibiting possession and distribution of terrorist materials. It's interesting that this person who wrote the articles put terrorist in inverted commas, because they're right. That's very perceptive. Who decides what's terrorist materials? If it's a manifesto on how to make a bloody bomb, an IDE or something, okay. But that's not what they're talking about, and that's the really concerning part. Here we go. Outside of legitimate research, public interest reporting, and other professional reasons, so in other words, if you're a sanctioned media mouthpiece like the ABC, yes, even though the AFP raided the ABC and the ABC screeched about it, that's another story. There are no circumstances where individuals should be accessing or sharing instructional terrorist manuals. They throw that up there front and centre, so you go, well, yes, I agree. But then, propaganda magazines, graphically violent images, no problem. No normal person would have a problem with that. videos and other content produced by terrorists. Now, if that's, exactly what it's all about, fair enough. But the problem is, as with all of the power grabs by this globalist cult around control, monitoring, fining, punishing, they love punishing, they want to monitor us 24/7, they want us to live in smart cities where absolutely every aspect of our lives is controlled and monitored by AI, and they want a social credit score just like they have in China, so that you step out of line, you'll find you won't be able to buy a ticket for a train, never mind planes. You won't get on a plane unless you, Jesus Christ, unless you've been vaccinated 35 ways from Sunday. And even then, you'll have to wear a mask and look down whenever someone important comes along. This is how they want it. And you'll find that air travel will become a reward under the social crediting system. That it was beta tested in China, and now they're rolling it out here. And all of the punishing, all of the monitoring, all of the smearing in the controlled media, that is the beginnings of our social crediting system. That's all part of it. And the racially vilifying white people, that's to force what they see as the threat. And this is why they keep harping on about right-wing extremism. They know that the people that are eventually going to say they'll take it and take it and take it, and I'm talking about ordinary European Australians and Indigenous Australians will too, but they're being weaponised against white people just like they are in the United States. Black people being weaponised against white people. When you say anything that they don't like, when you, look at this, certain aspects of current criminal laws are out of step with community expectations. It's not community expectations, my friends, it's your expectations and your globalist masters. This is same agenda's been rolled out worldwide. Community expectations around being protected from physical violence, fine, but people disagreeing with your radical agenda has nothing to do with community expectations. And the point I'm ultimately trying to get to here is that once you bring in this on the pretext of, being against graphically violent images, videos and other, you basically open the door for them to change what they mean about extremism. So they're already saying, and again they're inverted commas, would make possession of propaganda and terrorist manifestos. See, they can basically call anything a terrorist manifesto now. If you say, I don't like the whole forced vaccination agenda, I don't like the fact that we're being forced to take thousands, if not millions of people from non-European, non-white countries, non-culturally compatible countries. As you've seen in the States, they've got a replacement migration program happening. There was one article that said that the UN wants the United States to be like 500, 600 million people by 2050, and they're not going to be coming from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, or any of the UK. They're going to be coming from Africa, South America, and Asia. And on the face of it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Immigration does provide all sorts of cultural and intellectual advantages. But the fact of the matter is, when you do it at a pace that outstrips the ability of that country to absorb mass migration, as you've seen in Europe, outstandingly, you look at Paris. Paris is a bloody shitstorm. They should have the military on the street permanently there. It's just out of control. They've got whole areas where the police don't want to go because they've got thugs armed with AK-47s there who'll shoot at them if they go there. So, this is what happens when you try and force different cultural identities together too quickly. Yes, they'll slowly integrate eventually, although some ideologies don't want to integrate, and that's another problem. So anyway, this was always coming. The fact that they're predicting, that shows you how aggressively they're pushing this. Whenever they start talking about things in 12 months' time and extreme ideologies, terrorist attack and extreme ideology. So the terrorist attack is the lever. That's the lever. They flog you over the head with that threat. I don't want to be blown up when I go to the supermarket. Maybe the police should have new powers. No, the police shouldn't have new powers. They've got all the powers they need. if you're here from God knows where and you want to blow people up because you don't like their beliefs, you don't like Christianity, you don't like, the lax morality over here, which I kind of understand in many respects, the lax morality part of it, they already know about you. They're already monitoring people who are ideologically extreme. They don't need more powers. They've got enough bloody powers as it is. If they arrest people, if people are actively chatting online, let's go and blow someone up, or let's do this, or let's do that, they get onto them. They arrest them all the time. I know, I work in the media. So, this is more a pretext to give the federal police more power. They want to be able to come around and smash on your door, as I said in the last couple of videos, and say, well, we don't really like what you said online. You said something nasty to this person or that minority. You shouldn't have said that, as I've got in the UK. Oh, you said something against trans people, so we're going to arrest you for extremism. That's what the pretext is. They use the threat of a terrorist attack that they have no knowledge of, and they demand new powers, more money, always more money, and the people that, just like the gun control, the only people that lost their guns were the law-abiding shooters. The criminals have still all got guns. Believe you me, I know. I see the raw police footage. Every single person who's arrested with even a small amount of drugs in Australia has a handgun. Where do all these handguns come from? They go, oh, they're stealing them from legitimate shooters. Bollocks. Bollocks. Legitimate shooters aren't that stupid. They have them locked up, believe me, and guns aren't cheap, even when you buy them legitimately. So that's rubbish. It does happen occasionally, but nowhere near enough to supply all of the guns I see with these drug dealers, bikies, thugs, even bloody kids in stealing cars for fun. Have guns. It's amazing. Every single time they pull one of these little buggers over, they've got a gun. In Australia, where we've supposedly got some of the stiffest gun laws in the world. Thanks, John Howard. It really worked well, mate. All you did is disarm the normal people, and the criminals have got as many guns as they always had. In fact, they've got more. So, be very wary. I sort of wanted to give this guy the benefit of the doubt when he said he was dumping these terms, but I should have known. That was just playing with semantics. Anyway, have a good day. I'm Chaz the Advocate.